Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. It's Danny here. Thank you for watching. Today's video is a clean with me video, but it will be a little bit different in the sense that instead of just playing music, I'm going to be telling you true stories about me. So these things actually happened, and I often look back on them and think that, you know, we've had guardian angels looking after us in the past, that's for sure. The first story I am going to call Don't Look Up. It was probably about 1975, so I probably would have been about 7 or 8, and we were living on the Gold Coast. We lived at Mermaid Waters, so our fence actually backed onto Pacific Fair, where Pacific Fair is now, but at the time Pacific Fair hadn't been built. They were just starting to build it. All of that area was just all big sand dunes, and I remember they brought in big pipes when they were starting to build it, and we used to climb over the pipes and things. So it was just a small block we were living on. It was Mum and Dad's first house, but Mum and Dad bought horses, and I sort of think back and I think, why? I wonder why they did that, because like they weren't horsey people. They'd never had horses, neither of them, and I'm glad they did, because we had a lot of fun over the years with them. But because they never had the land where we lived, they had to adjust them out. And if anyone knows the Gold Coast, they adjusted them. They had a block of land out at Clear Island Waters back in 1974, 1975, the mid 1970s type of thing. It was just all bush out there. It was just bush, unsealed roads. There was absolutely nothing. And so I think it was probably about 2 or 3 acres they adjusted with the horses. And I remember it had a really massive, huge, old derelict Queenslander on it. And Nikki and I used to go in it, and, you know, he used to like looking around it, and it was sort of just scary looking. The horses we had, I think the first horse we might have got might have been a Shetland. I think it might have been Lady. It was either Lady or Dusty. So Lady was a little Shetland, and she only had one eye. And then Dusty, he was only quite young. He was only a foal, and he was in very good condition. Yeah, it says Dusty, Lady. We had BB. We had Cobby. He was a Welsh cob and pretty flighty. I learnt to ride on him. Who else? And Traveller. He was beautiful, grey horse. Anyway, we used to go riding around there, and Mum and Dad had friends. Their names were Graham and Marie. They had land where, I don't know, it could have been around near Rabina there. It was just sort of a bit further up from where we were keeping the horses. This one day, I remember this one afternoon, it was Mum, I, and Soxy, our dog, and I don't think Nikki was there. I don't think she probably would have been a little bit young to go riding. Should have only been about 4. This one day we went to their place and we went riding. Instead of riding on their property, we actually went, they had a long steep driveway, and we actually rode on the road. It was like an unsealed road, you know, very dusty, a lot of rocks. There were never many cars around, really. I mean, it was very deserted. And this day we went riding with Graham, Marie, Mum, and me. And it must have been on their and I would say we would have been riding their horses, because I don't think we would have ridden from our block to their place. So we went riding, all was fine. And I remember when we were riding, this car kept driving past, but it was driving past really aggressively, really fast. And because it was driving fast, it was like taunting us almost, and, you know, throwing dust up in our faces. And it probably did this about 2 or 3 times. And I remember Graham saying to Mum, do you want me to follow you guys home because of this guy? Mum said, no, that's okay, it will all be fine. Anyway, we went back to their property and unsaddled the horses and left. When we left, everything was okay for a little while, but I think Mum was pretty on edge. There was me, and the Soxy was sitting in between Mum and I in the front seat, and next minute this car comes up behind us and speeds past, and it was the same car with the same guy in it, and just threw dust up. Like, Mum couldn't see anything. She couldn't see where she was going. It was really scary, and I was only young. I didn't really know what was going on. I sort of did at the same time. I thought, this isn't right, this is a bit scary. So because Mum couldn't actually see anything, she sort of slowed down. She didn't really, it was a bit scary in the sense that she thought he could have blocked the road up ahead. She couldn't see anything, so for all she knew, he could have been in the middle of the road blocking her way, and that was a really scary thought for her. The dust cleared though, and we sort of rounded the bend. Up ahead there was like, it wasn't a road or a driveway, but it was like a track that sort of went into the bush, And she was thinking, I hope he hasn't ducked in there because he might pull out in front of us and stop us. So she sort of drove a little bit cautiously. She looked over, and what he had done was he had parked in there. He got out of his car. He'd covered himself all in mud, and he was standing by the roadway. He came out and was standing by the roadway and with absolutely nothing on. So he was flashing himself at us, and Mum's saying, don't look, Danny, don't look. And I'm trying to peek up. I couldn't see anything. I didn't know what was going on really. I couldn't see anything because I was too little. I couldn't see over the sea. So Mum drove home and told Dad, and Dad said, well, we've got to report this. We've got to tell the police. And I remember the police came out to our house, and Mum told them what had happened. He said, we know who this person is. He's done this before. We know his name. And they actually told Mum and Dad what his name was. I don't know what it was. I wouldn't say if I did, but he said he works at the fire station on the Gold Coast, one of the fire stations. He said, you can report it. You can take this matter to court. You can proceed if you want. He said, but I gotta say, his uncle is a barrister and he gets him off every time. So it's just up to you, but it's probably not much point. Mum and Dad didn't do anything about it. They didn't proceed with anything. You know, what could they do? Never actually saw him again. It never happened again. You just sort of have to wonder though, if someone like that gets away with something often enough, you know, what else could it lead to? If they get cocky, they think they can do whatever they want. Yeah, that wasn't right. It wasn't right at all, but what can you do? These things happen, and sometimes you just don't have the power to do anything about it. But at least they reported it, and hopefully down the track he may have been stopped somehow. So the second true story starts probably in about 1977, so not too long after the flasher incident. We moved from Mermaid Waters, which is right in the middle of the Gold Coast, so it's near shops, the beautiful beaches, and it's really just close to everything. We moved from there up to the northern end of the Gold Coast, and it was to a little town called Pimpama. Back then it was really bushy, it was really country, and it was an isolated area. It had a lot of sugarcane fields and dairy farms. It had one general store, which was not too far up the road from us, and the school had 2 teachers, so there was one big building pretty much, but there were 2 rooms and I think a teeny little library. So grade 1, 2 and 3 was in one room, and grades 4, 5, 6, 7 was in the other room. And I think in my grade there were only about 3 or 4 kids. It was really small, so it gives you an idea of how big Pimpama was and how populated it was, which wasn't much at all. I'm not too sure the reasoning really behind the move or what Dad was thinking. I think it was to have more land for us and the horses, because it was 6 acres, so it was a really nice large block. But I remember my grandma and granddad saying to Mum, why on earth do you want to move all the way out there? Like, at the time it was just in the middle of the sticks, it was in the middle of nowhere pretty much. So we lived off the grid in a bus while both Mum and Dad built the house. And I mean, when I say they built the house, they literally built the house with their bare hands. And I'm not quite sure how long it actually took them. I'd say it would have been a year at least. But for us kids it was an adventure living in the bus. But I do remember the winters, they were freezing, just freezing cold. And I remember when we finally did move into the house, and I don't think the house ever was completely finished while we lived there, but when we did eventually move into it, it just seemed so big after the tiny bus. And I remember Mum saying, how am I ever going to clean these benches? They're just so big. And I mean, they weren't really, but just compared to the little bus we were in, they did seem pretty big. Anyway, back to the story. One afternoon after school, Mum, Dad, me and Nikki got in the car and we went up to the shop for something. And that didn't really happen all that often, like we all going up together, like with Dad as well. Like sometimes Mum would just go up by herself with us. Looking back on it, we just are thankful that that didn't happen that day and that Dad did come up with us. So when we arrived at the shop, which was really only 5 minutes drive up the road, and Mum went into the shop, and as far as I can remember, Dad waited in the car, and I got out because I saw a girl I knew from school, and I got out to talk to her. So I probably would have been 10 at the time. I think I was in about grade 5 or 6, and I remember us going up to this red car that was parked in the front of the shop, and the shop had no specific designated parking bays, you just parked anywhere sort of thing. It was a red BMW, and you know, really not the type of car you'd see around that area, so we were quite interested in looking at it. I remember we went up and we looked through the front window, and on the front seat was an old-fashioned tape recorder. Not a cassette tape recorder, but it was like a reel-to-reel tape recorder that you'd see like in an old spy movie. And you know, we thought, wow, look at that. That just seems so weird to us. When Mum was in the shop, there were 3 men, and they were very well dressed. I'm not sure if they were in suits, but you know, they had expensive clothes on. And it's funny because I don't have any recollection of them or what they look like. I think I was just too busy talking to my friend and admiring their car. But this is what Mum saw, and she said they were very arrogant, they were very cocky, rude. She said she smiled at one of them, you know, like you do to be polite when you see someone, even if you don't know them, and he just stared straight through her. So as we were all getting in the car to leave, one of the men came out of the shop and stood right in front of our car and just stared at Mum. Now Mum was really attractive. She'd been a model in the past, and she wasn't dressed up by any means, but still, she was still really attractive. Dad actually had a nightclub in Surface called the Sapango, and that's how they met. Sort of wasn't unusual that people would look at her, but the way he was looking at her and standing there and just staring, it was aggressive and scary. And Mum actually said to Dad, whatever you do, don't turn around and drive home, just drive forward. So instead of going home, Dad just drove straight up the road. At the end of the road was the highway, and I think even at that time the highway was just a 1 lane each way, so it wasn't like it is today where it's 4 lane and really busy. But they got on the highway and headed down towards the coast, so heading towards Coomera, and Dad kept driving. He actually turned off at Coomera, and I do know that they were considering stopping in at the police station, just going to the police station and telling them what was happening, because the men were still in the car, they were still following us. They followed us off the highway, but I think Mum and Dad thought if they went back the other way and went towards home, by chance hopefully they wouldn't follow, because they would be heading back in the other direction that they'd come, so they thought that might put them off. So they set off back home, but they did follow us, and at this stage we were all pretty much panicking. We took the turn off the highway and pulled back into our service road, so going back into our suburb pretty much. And I'm not sure whether Mum and Dad could see them at that point. I can't remember. There was a road, I remember, that it was called Coringal Drive, and it was a short road because it was a dead end, but it was very steep and sort of disappeared up. And Mum said, well, I don't know whether Mum said, but Dad turned up that road and he went up that road. We went up to the top of the hill, and you know, I'm not sure what the idea was there, maybe trying to avoid them or maybe trying to lose them, but I think that was a bit of wishful thinking, because as we were going down the hill, probably halfway down, they actually flew up so fast past us, so that obviously maybe thought they'd lost us and they were trying to find us. They were flying, they were going really fast. So we continued down the hill quickly and turned toward our driveway, and it would probably have been about 300 or 400 meters, maybe a bit more, and it was just over the crest of a small hill, and it was a pretty straight road. So I mean, if we looked back, we could see if their car was coming, and we couldn't see it. And Mum said, look, when we get up to our driveway, just duck into our driveway quickly. It wasn't really a driveway, actually, it was more of a track, and it went through a gully, and our house was on the other side, and it was quite bushy, so it was relatively hidden, but you know, if you were trying to look, you could still see. We had a garage, but it had never actually had a garage door, so like Dad couldn't drive in and close the door and the car would be concealed. So what he did was park as close as he could to one of the walls, so that if they drove past and they were looking through, they would have a harder time to find the actual car or see it. We went inside the house, we were all very scared. Dad actually, I remember, got a piece of wood paling or something that he brought inside. You know, I really think that they're expecting the worst at this point. So this was obviously before mobile phones, but on top of that, we never even actually had any phone. We never had a landline or anything, and so we were pretty much just sitting ducks waiting for something to happen. Our house was actually built towards the back of the property on a bit of a hill, so when we looked out the windows, like we had all large sliding glass windows along the front of the house, we could see the road in front. It was a fair way down. It would have been probably a couple of 100 meters to the front of our property to the road, and the driveway that we came through was on the other side of the property. And for a long time afterwards, we could see that car driving backwards and forwards looking for us, and it was actually terrifying. They did give up in the end, and we just have no idea what would have happened if they found us. I really would hate to think, but I know after it all happened everyone had their own theories. We thought maybe because the guy was staring at Mum that they had mistaken her for someone else, someone they knew or someone that they had been after or something. I just don't know. My grandma actually said maybe they'd been the toe cutting gang, like apparently there was a toe cutting gang or something around at the time. And Dad said that he had heard there had been a murder up north, and 3 men had been spotted in the area that they were looking for. So, you know, it could have been any of those things. It could have been none of those things. We just don't know. But we know that, you know, we were protected. We believe that we were protected and looked after, but how we got out of that, we will never know. And Mum was actually really shaken up for a long period of time after that. And I really think it affected her more than it did any of the rest of us. So when I was editing the video, I realized that there was an ironic twist at the end of this, and it involves both stories. When Dad had retired, and it was around the time Dad had retired, the whole area was being bought up by developers, and the government actually bought their block of land. A lot of other developers were building houses and townhouses, that sort of thing, residences to sell off. But the government bought ours, and on it they put a fire station and they put a police station. I think that's really ironic with what I've been talking about the stories today, and I just realized that when I was editing. So there you go. So I really hope you've enjoyed my video today, guys. I know it's a bit different. I hope I didn't bore you, and I will see you in next week's video. Bye for now.